I'm extremely disappointed that the underlying bill prohibits the Secretary from making virtually any changes to the student loan program. My amendment would strike the section in this bill that prohibits the Secretary from developing new or modifying existing repayment plans. This prohibition is highly concerning, as it would prevent any administration from making any improvements to the student loan repayment, from common sense changes to bold debt relief reforms. Flexibility such as the student loan payment pause, student debt cancellation, and the new SAFE plan that was critical to students and borrowers across the country during the COVID-19 pandemic. Without the ability to modify, the borrowers might be stuck with the same repayment plan that might not be suitable for their financial situation. This prohibition is a political attack against President Biden for providing monumental changes to the student loan program that benefits borrowers. The administration has been working tirelessly to make significant reforms to the loan program that aim to benefit borrowers and ease their financial burden by canceling nearly $137 billion in student loan debt. It is sad to see my colleagues work this tirelessly to force student loan borrowers to have higher and unaffordable bills. I strongly urge the removal of this section to ensure that the Secretary has the authority to make practical changes that support borrowers during times of need. I ask my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back. Thank you so much for joining us today, Administrator. Your agency has been fighting the child labor crisis before it became a major news story. The Wage and Hour Division's enforcement actions have impacted almost 6,000 children, marking an 80% increase since 2019. This is an issue that both Democrats and Republicans should prioritize, especially in this subcommittee, and yet we have not held a hearing. We have not seriously discussed or marked up a useful legislation either. Although Congress's legislative and funding focus on child labor has been lacking, to say the least, I'm relieved that this administration is doing whatever it can to mitigate child labor violations. Administrator Lumen, could you describe how your office has enhanced its enforcement work, even with limited resources? And can you outline actions taken by DOL Task Force on Child Labor Exploitation that launched last year?
Thank you, Congressman Omar from the state of Minnesota. Absolutely. Child labor exploitation has and continues to be one of the primary focuses of the Wage and Hour Division and the U.S. Department of Labor. We have to protect the most vulnerable workers in America, and those include children. So the work that we're doing, which is very resource intensive when we're looking at Packer Sanitation Services, Inc., for example, where we found more than 102 children who were working in violation of the child labor laws. And that was across 13 states. 13 facilities in 8 states, but there were kids as young as 13. And so this has just got to be a priority, a focus, an area where we are absolutely putting the full expertise and be laser focused across the Wage and Hour Division to protect these kids. So we very much are launched this National Strategic Enforcement Initiative to address child labor exploitation. And this is something that we are making sure that all of our investigators are equipped with the resources and the tools that they need to be able to identify the red flags of child labor violations and then also to enforce those violations. We also have the Interagency Task Force, which is the whole of government approach, where all the departments across the administration are recognizing that they have a role to play in helping make sure that we are combating child labor exploitation and keeping kids safe.
You've had some successes recently. Can you give us an example of some of those successes?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Congresswoman. So again, just recently, we had a case out of Minnesota where we were finding that there were teens that were employed illegal to operate dangerous equipment at a foods manufacturing facility. We have some cases across California where we found that children were being responsible for the meat packing facilities and actually working on the kill room floor, killing poultry. And that was a $3.8 million recovery for of civil money penalties, as well as violations, as well as other FLSA violations. And then we've also found children working in automobile, that's the word I'm looking for, an automobile manufacturing where we find those children working in violation as well.
Thank you for those examples. I know that, we were also having conversations about addressing misclassifications. Ms. Lumen, could you walk us through the process of a typical investigation into misclassification?
Thank you, Congresswoman. Again, misclassification of workers of employees as independent contractors is a priority of the Wage and Hour Division of the department, and we're specifically focused on the most low-wage vulnerable workers who may be deprived of their opportunity to get minimum wage and overtime. And so we're very much looking for and seeing, unfortunately, workers like healthcare workers or construction workers, or, as I said, dishwashers who have been misclassified as independent contractors and therefore deprived of their opportunity to get overtime wages. That's what we're particularly focused on and concerned about, and that's where we're making sure that we're protecting all vulnerable workers and making sure they get their rights under the law.
Yeah, really appreciate that work. Wage theft cases have been rising in Minnesota, and our state Attorney General Keith Ellison has been working really hard to make sure we address some of the problems that exist in the gig economy. And I appreciate you and him and all of the people that are working on this issue. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Chairwoman Fox is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I recognize the gentlewoman from Minnesota for 5 minutes.
Thank you for joining us again, Director. I know you didn't come prepared to give parental advice, but that was interesting to watch. This outlook looks better than expected, even compared to the pre-pandemic outlooks. Job growth is strong, unemployment is low, the economy continues to grow. It is clear that policies and investments centered on working families help support a resilient and dynamic economy. Supply-side reforms like housing development and expanded childcare can help strengthen our labor force, increase economic productivity, and grow our fiscal capacity. For example, the CPO outlook projects that net immigration flow will add $7 trillion to the economy over the next decade. Director Swiggle, can you explain how comprehensive immigration reform could keep improving our labor force and strengthen economic development?
Yes. It's, as you said, immigration would add to our economy. Our labor force would be higher. That means our income would be higher, our output would be higher, and that in turn would generate additional tax revenue. And that's what we have under the immigration we project so far. A reform could further those changes.
That's wonderful. Childcare is another good example of a policy that invests in our future and can have long-term positive impact for households and the greater economy. Our Education and Labor Committee passed important childcare provisions as part of the Build Back Better plan, lowering the costs for families and increasing the supply of stable, high-quality childcare should help improve labor force participation, especially for mothers, while still guaranteeing livable wages for childcare workers. Does your 2020 analysis of the Democratic proposed policies on childcare support these findings?
Yes, at the time of the Build Back Better legislation, we looked at those proposals, and supporting childcare would increase the labor force participation of parents, especially mothers, which would mean more people in the workforce. And for those individuals, the ones who come back to work, would mean higher earnings for them in the future as well.
Yeah, can you expand a little bit more in detail on the impact on long-term employment and earnings when high-quality childcare is affordable and widely accessible?
I can, and in some sense, that's connecting the policy today to improved earnings trajectories. As someone who comes back into the workforce, gains experience, as they gain experience, gain skills, their earnings rise and their incomes rise into the future.
Wonderful. In last year's outlook, the CPO projected revenues to amount around 18% of GDP in 2023. But in this outlook, you're projecting revenues will amount to 17.5% of GDP in 2024, even though this time around it seems like there are even stronger economic conditions and assumptions. Could you explain this gap, and specifically what variables are you seeing that would lead to this slightly lower revenue levels?
Okay, and in a sense, it's both the numerator and denominator are changing. So it's both the revenue is changing and the GDP, the denominator, is changing. So we see a larger economy, which means that a given number of dollars of revenue will be a smaller fraction. And that, so even though we do have more revenues coming in with the strong economy, as a share of the economy, the numbers, our projection is smaller this year.
Interesting. Finally, can you account for, obviously we have this massive job creation, low unemployment, inflation is down, but it seems, and you probably heard from some of my colleagues, that people are still saying our economy is bad. What do you account for that?
Now, it's a good question. I was going to say, I'm the economist and not the sociologist or psychologist. We've had several challenging years. The economy is coming out of it, but of course, many families' incomes are still affected by the difficult times of the past and the high inflation that we had. Even though inflation's come down, the price level is still high, and so all these factors are affecting families.
Well, thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Omar, you have 5 minutes for the gentlelady from Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman. And I don't want to get in trouble, so I'll stay as the vice ranking. Director, it's really good to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to talk a little bit about addressing the opioid crisis that we're seeing throughout the country, especially in my district. According to the CDC, the national overdose rate topped over 100,000 deaths again in 2023. Federal spending on the crisis has surged, with roughly 40% more dollars flowing to our states. States like Minnesota have recently been allocated hundreds of millions of dollars for opioid overdose prevention as well. While all of this funding has helped, there's still much more to be done. That's why it was very encouraging to see the president's budget request continuing to prioritize vital investment in SUPERCUT. These programs promote mental health, prevent substance misuse, and provide treatment and recovery support. Director Young, can you outline the new funding priorities in this proposal that could better support our states and community organizations in the front lines of this epidemic?
I don't think there's anyone here who would disagree that we have to use every tool at our disposal to do something about the opioid epidemic in this country. This president has put forth robust budgets, even in a flat budget under the Fiscal Responsibility Act. This president is showing that it is his priority to do something about this epidemic, Congresswoman. $44.5 billion for the National Drug Control Program agencies, an almost $900 million increase over continuing resolution level funding. This budget prioritizes expanding evidence-based harm reduction, expanding access to treatment for substance abuse use disorder, overdose prevention, combating narcotics trafficking networks, countering illicit fentanyl at the border, and disrupting the international synthetic drug trade. I know we got into a little back and forth about the border bill. I think one place that has always had bipartisan support was in the president's border supplemental request, which to put more of the equipment, the NII equipment at the land ports of entry to catch fentanyl from coming into our southern border. And I hope we can find a way to work in a bipartisan way to do something about this.
Thank you so much. I hope so. I hope so too. I want to talk a little bit about the housing shortage as well that many of our communities are experiencing. I'm glad that this budget proposal keeps pushing for pro-housing policies, especially at a time when the dream of home ownership seems increasingly unreachable. To address our housing shortage, we must build more affordable housing and more different types of housing. This idea is the core of my Homes for All Act, investing billions of dollars in development of permanent, affordable public and private housing units with a focus on mitigating residential displacement and segregation. Congress can and must lead here, since it has done before by delivering funds to our public housing authorities. The federal government once directly helped build so much housing. We renovated and repaired homes and provided subsidies to increase home ownership on a massive scale. It is time to repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment and get back to directly assisting our localities with developing and guaranteeing stable housing for all. Director Young, can you describe both the ongoing and proposed actions that the administration is prioritizing to improve affordable housing stock?
Again, inflation is moderated 2/3, but families are still struggling. And one place is in housing, a lack of affordable housing. That's why this president, when we say lowering costs is a theme of this budget, housing is centered to that. Helping first-time homeowners, helping middle-class families with tax credits who might be locked in with low interest rates, who need a bigger house for, a surprise third child. They need to move up to a bigger house. And we need first-time homeowners to have access to more housing stock. This budget would do something about that to allow a 2-year tax credit. Also, $20 billion in funding to have localities, municipalities apply. And if they have a zone problem, use the funding to do something about that. Build affordable housing. We know every solution is different depending on where you live. And we look forward to working with those who want to take on those pieces of legislation.
Wonderful. I know a little bit about that surprise third child. So I felt like that was directed at me.
It wasn't actually.
But I appreciate the concern and care that is given to increasing more affordable housing, both in ownership and just in stock. Thank you so much.
I thank the gentlelady from.
Ms. Omar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. President Shafiq, I wanted to get a clarification earlier. One of my colleagues asked you, have you seen anti-Muslim protests on campus?
I have seen, we have had pro-Israeli demonstrations on campus.
No.
But
just
not,
a protest that was
not-
against Muslims.
No, I have
you
not
seen
seen
one against Arabs?
No, I have not.
Have you seen one against Palestinians?
No, I have not.
Have you seen one against Jewish people? Have you seen a protest saying we are against Jewish people?
No, I have seen.
Okay,
no,
thank you for that clarification. There has been a rise in targeting and harassment against anti-war protesters because it's been pro-war and anti-war protesters is what it seems like, correct?
Correct. There has
Okay,
been.
thank you. Activists on campus, including Jewish students, Black and Brown, Arab and Muslim students. How many of the organizations that were canceled in Colombia involved Jewish students?
One of the organizations is called Jewish Voices for Peace.
Yes, and encompassed of Jewish students?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. There was there's been a recent attack on the democratic rights of students across the country. I was appalled to learn that in April, Colombia suspended and evicted 6 students for their involvement in the pro-Palestinian panel event on campus. It happened that all 6 students were arbitrarily targeted after the university brought in a team of private and former police investigators. These investigators harassed, intimidated Palestinian students at their homes, demanding to see students' private text messages, and sent threatening emails to the leaders of those pro-Palestinian groups. I would like to ask you to speak a little bit more to this situation and ask you if you guys have utilized private former police investigators before, or is this the first time?
So this was a very serious case. We had students who, on an online
If you could
call,
shorten your answer, that would be really appreciated.
of course, who invited people who were inciting violence, and that is unacceptable. And so we needed to get to the bottom of it, and so that's why we brought private investigators along with notifying
how
the
secure
FBI.
were you these students that you evicted and suspended were involved? Did you do any investigation? Was there a hearing?
They refused to cooperate with the investigation, and so until they do so, they are suspended.
Okay, thank you. And then in January, there was an incident involving students that were protesting that were attacked with a toxic chemical substance, leaving many hospitalized. A lot of them did not receive support from the school administrators. Can you speak to what is happening with the investigation, if you all are cooperating, and why weren't the students provided any support after they've experienced that attack?
So this is still with the police, and as far as we know, we think it was an odorous substance, and we did reach out to all of those students who said they were affected. Many of them didn't want support. We also
It took you guys more than 4 days to reach out to students.
No, I don't believe that's correct.
Okay, will you
actually.
respond, give me a written response with the fact that you all responded right away to those students?
Yes, I would be happy to do that.
All right, appreciate that. And it looks like there's been a lot of doxing and harassment that has taken place. What protections are a student being provided?
We created a doxing resources group to support students. There were many students who were affected by this. Muslim students, Jewish students, and completely, other students. That group we had 90 students reach out to that group to get support in terms of both technical support, legal support, privacy scrubbing, and so on.
And before I run out of time, I wanted to ask what do your rules say about professors that harass students online, like Professor Shai Davidar has done, and professors who directly attack you as the president as a coward and a liar?
So, as president, I'm used to being attacked, but attacking our students is unacceptable. And in that case, we've had more than 50 complaints about that professor, and he is currently under investigation for harassment and
I would love a
discrimination.
follow-up on that as well. Thank you so much. I yield back.
Representative from...
I'm sorry. Oh, no. Sorry. We are out of time.
The representative from Minnesota, Ms. Omar, is recognized for 5 minutes.
It's good to see you again, Secretary Sue. I wanted to talk a little bit about the child labor violations that are soaring, that we're seeing throughout the country. We are also seeing some states rolling back labor protections for minors. From Florida to Iowa, Republican lawmakers have been weakening child labor laws. Could you provide update on the interagency task force on child labor and how the Department of Labor is following up on potential hotspots?
Thank you, Congresswoman. The Department of Labor has been very hard at work trying to combat the scourge of child labor. One of the reasons so much attention is being paid to it today is that we have uncovered some really horrific cases. And there's just no mistaking that these are both really young children, some of them working the night shift under very, very hazardous situations, as young as 13-year-old working on the kill floor, using toxic chemicals, and working and losing limbs and their lives. And so last year, the last fiscal year, the Department of Labor assessed the most penalties that we have ever assessed under child labor laws. We also lead an interagency task force that you mentioned in order to make sure that all of government is working together on the various pieces that it will take to keep children safe, to engage with all the other parties that might be helpful to us as we try to identify these cases, and to hold employers accountable who engage in this practice in such blatant disregard of the law. So that task force continues to work together to identify gaps and to try to make sure that we are putting a stop to this practice.
Yeah, thank you for that. The Bureau of International Labor Affairs plays an essential role in leveling the playing field for all workers. ILAP helps enforce our trade commitments and strengthens compliance with labor standards. Could you explain how the interests and priorities of workers across the globe are interconnected? And how should we be thinking about the plight of workers in Mexico, for example, as it relates to the plight of workers here in the United States? And what would it mean if Republicans were successful in slashing the budget for ILAP?
Thank you very much.
If you can be as precise as possible. I've got one more question.
Yes. So the well-being of workers in this country is tied to the well-being of workers in other countries. When we have the ability for to create a race to the bottom in which all workers are vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, it's not good for any worker. Through our iLab, we both produce reports and advocate to make sure that, for example, prohibitions against goods made through forced labor from coming into this country are enforced. We work closely with our partners at the Department of Homeland Security on that. In terms of Mexico, there's the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, and we are, through iLab, play a role in making sure that those provisions are enforced and that working people in Mexico also have a full and fair right to join a union of their choice, and we believe that that will improve not just working conditions for workers in Mexico, but also the competitive disadvantage that working people in the U.S. have to face when we don't ensure that workers across the globe are protected.
Yeah, thank you. I commend you for that work. I'm also proud of the work that the Biden administration and congressional Democrats did in enacting in the American Rescue Plan to save many multi-employer pensions. Actually, in my district, the Twin Cities Bakery Drivers Pension Plan was one that benefited from it. 1,075 pensions were saved. What would happen to my constituents, to businesses, and to employees across the nation if we did not address the multi-employer pension plan?
I mean, this is so important. This is about basic security in retirement. This is about working people who have saved and are relying on having their retirement savings so that they can stop working at the end of a career and know that they can continue to live with security. The multi-employer pension fund saving that this Congress passed and the president signed into law helps to make sure that those individuals in those funds actually get the retirement savings that they're entitled to. And as you've seen in your district, as I've heard going across the country, that has made a world of difference to a lot of working people. And at the same time, those employers who were part of that multi-employer pension fund also benefited because it allowed them to continue to operate. It's prevented them from going into bankruptcy, and so it was really a win-win, and I appreciate the work that was done to make that happen. Yeah. Proud to be part of implementing that.
Thank you. I yield back.
The representative from Pennsylvania, Mr. Smucker, is recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bean. Ms. Omar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
It's good to see you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you so much for joining us. I got a little jealous about everybody thanking you for coming to their district, so we should soon see you in CD5. I wanted to talk a little bit about the rise in targeting and harassment of students on campus that are protesting against the genocide that's taking place in Gaza, including Jewish students, Black, Brown, Arab, and Muslim students. Emotions and fears are running high as students of all backgrounds say they are fearful of escalations of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and bigotry. My office has received countless stories from Jewish students, Arab students, Muslim students who have been targeted, harassed, and alienated on campus just because they are standing against the genocide that's happening in Gaza. I know that you've been meeting with students, parents, and leaders. Is there something that you can share with us about the rise of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on college campuses?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. You know, when I hear from students and families directly, they're scared. They're scared. You know, safety on campus is something that they don't feel like they should compromise or, you know, we strongly condemn any acts of violence or discrimination on campus. We've been very clear about that. But what I'm hearing from families is, you know, that they're scared, that children are having to hide symbols of their faith on their way to class so that they're not targeted. That to me is, you know, as a father and as an educator, something that I stand against.
I know that the administration has condemned a lot of speech on campus. What I have not heard be condemned is statements like kill all Muslims, kill all Arabs, level Gaza. Do you condemn those kind of comments?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Will you give your commitment to this committee and the American people that the department will investigate complaints of Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, and anti-Muslim discrimination?
Yes.
Thank you. What additional support could Congress provide for you to be able to ensure robust oversight and investigation and accountability is carried out?
No, thank you for that. We're asking for a $22 million increase in our budget. We were flat funded last year. In 2009, we had 58 more investigators and a third of the cases that we have today. In 2019, there were 10,000 cases a year. 2021, 22, there were 19,000. The increase is extremely high. We need additional investigators to close out these cases and make sure we're providing support to our students.
Do you have an idea of the number of cases that are pending at the moment?
We have 145 cases on shared ancestry open.
On college campuses?
On college campuses, yeah.
I want to pivot. Last time you were here, I asked you about the Mohela frustration that a lot of borrowers were experiencing, feeling like their rights were being violated. We talked about how concerned I was about renewing their contract. I know that the department has done some work in taking some of the cases off. It seems like that you all are going through some processing pauses as the transition happens. How are you ensuring that the borrowers do not have an interruption as the transition and the pause continue?
Sure. Thank you for that. And let me just go back to, we have 145 open cases, 100 cases since October 7th, and they may include K-12, but 100 cases since, and I believe those are college. I can get that information to you. We are transitioning some cases, as Mohela requested, to other servicers. We're communicating with borrowers to try to minimize disruption for public service loan forgiveness.
Okay. And I'm wondering how the department is planning to make sure those that remain with Mohela are able to receive a better service.
Well, look, I think part of the fixing the broken higher education system is making sure that we're looking at it from the perspective of the consumer. We need to improve student borrower services, really. And part of that, a lot of the work that we're doing at FSA and just contracting is to improve services. We're also holding folks accountable, all servicers. And there have been payments that we've withheld because the services weren't great to our borrowers. So we are holding them more accountable, and we're providing more resources. And as you mentioned with Mohela, we're moving some cases over at their request to make the process smoother for our borrowers.
Wonderful. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you.